Thanks for joining us. We're so glad you could watch another episode of The Catholic View for Women. I'm Teresa Tomeo, along with my co-host Janet Marana and Astrid Bennett Gutierrez, where we discuss things from a truly Catholic perspective, news and views from a Catholic perspective, including this issue that we certainly don't hear a lot about out there in the world, especially in the secular media, this term called chastity. This segment we're entitling The Chastity Choice. Now, we were chatting before we went on air that if you do hear the word chastity out there in the world, it's normally thought of something as what, medieval,
yeah, it
or
conjures
just
up ideas of something very backwards, very repressed.
Or, when they hear it, they think, oh, anyone who does chastity is prudish or behind the times, ashamed of their sexuality and their body and all this. And that's not the case. I mean, chastity really is first of all, for your own personal health, is better than young girls who go around having multiple sexual partners. There's been so much research done on that, the damage it does to them, both mentally, psychologically, and spiritually, and physically. And so chastity really is the healthy option. You think with all these people that are so interested in health these days, right? The green and the tree huggers, they would embrace chastity as the healthier option for young girls.
And chastity is a virtue. It's a positive virtue.
I was going to ask you, it's more than, obviously, it's a particular lifestyle where you're following the church teaching and you understand where sexuality, what it's for and where it belongs. But it's more than that, isn't it, in terms of chastity?
Absolutely. It's truly knowing how to love another person. It's respect, it's dignity. It's seeing sexuality as a gift, and it belongs in marriage, so it's being fully integrated as a sexual person. God made us unique as a man and a woman. I mean, it's a beautiful teaching, and so in this episode we want to unpackage it, and we have a beautiful testimony that we're going to be sharing that I'm really excited about.
Real quickly though, before we get into the interview, Astrid, let me ask you, because you are at ground zero. You're right on the front lines there in Los Angeles as a head of Hispanics for Life and working at a pregnancy center. Do the women that you counsel, do they even understand this concept? Have they heard about chastity at all, or what it is?
It's amazing. Women that are coming to crisis pregnancy centers have never really been told, many of them, how valuable they are, the dignity they have. So when they come to our centers, they're hearing the incredible value they have. They deserve true love, not to be used as objects. And here they are contemplating an abortion, and that's something that our viewers might not know, but 80% of women that are choosing abortion are single. So that means the crisis of abortion really is rooted in the lack of chastity. This virtue would help to create a culture of life. So it's so important in the pro-life movement that we communicate what true love really is, because when we take sexuality out of that context that God put it in, it's very, very destructive, and we see it in the pro-life movement every day. So a big part of what we do in pro-life is to uphold this value, give women this positive message, invite them to consider this lifestyle, and we tell them that with God's grace, everything is possible.
Now, this interview that we have, Janet, with Christina Barber, who's the executive director of Generation Life, she has a beautiful story, but it's interesting because in this interview she admits that when she first heard about it, it wasn't an easy road, and that also she saw it first as nothing more than a bunch of rules and regulations.
Yeah, she said, to me, even before I did the interview with her, that, oh yeah, I thought that, the church was, giving me, like, she was brought up in a very good Catholic family, and she had Catholic education, and so she was told all these things, and she saw them as a list, a bunch of no's. And as we know, really, what the church is not saying it's a bunch of no's, it's really a bunch of yeses.
Right.
But she said, she knew she had to be chaste, but getting to the point where she embraced it in a joyful way was a struggle and a road to go down.
What I also love about this, and this really touched my heart when we were watching the interview, was the idea of Jesus. Really, that relationship with Christ is what really changed her, and it helped her realize that it's not just a bunch of rules and regulations, it's about a relationship. So let's take a listen and a look at this beautiful testimony from a young woman who has chosen chastity as a way of life for herself, and she's hoping to spread the message not only in her own youth group, but elsewhere around the world and around the country. Let's take a listen.
So in today's day and age, it is so easy to think that you might be the only person that wants to live a life of chastity or a life of purity. And I know that when I was in high school, I felt like I was the only one that wanted to be chaste and to save myself for marriage. And at first it was really something, when I was in high school, it was really a burden. Chastity was a burden. I don't think I fully understood what it meant. I thought it was a list of rules that I had to follow to be good. And I didn't understand why people would stray until I fell in love for the first time. And when you fall in love, everything changes. And chastity really, it was burdensome for me at first. I just saw it, like I said, as a list of rules and regulations that I had to follow. And it took me a while to understand. And it was really when I encountered other young people at a conference that I went to at Franciscan University, where I met other young people that were joyfully living chastity. And I was living it, but kind of burdened by it. It was sort of making me miserable. I kept thinking, what's right? How far is too far? What's okay? What's not okay? And I met these other young people that were happy and were free and were speaking about chastity with a smile. And at first, I was kind of envious of them. And then even in my own head, I was kind of making fun of them, thinking, well, that can't be really normal. And as I spent a weekend with them, I realized they were the most normal, the most real people that I had ever met. And that weekend, I had an encounter in adoration with the Blessed Sacrament. And I just felt like the Lord was inviting me to give all of myself to Him and to not let the dating part of my life be something separate from Him, to let Him come on my dates and things like that. So I sort of, that weekend just gave the Lord like a little crack into my heart, I think, to say, okay, I'll give this fully a try. And what He did was kind of storm in, and then from that point on, it was kind of all I could talk about, all I could live. Now, I gave the Lord a crack of my heart, a piece of my heart, but He came in and did the work, and it took time. So at first, I was dating someone, and now I had a whole new perspective, and these young people that I met took chastity to the next level. So they set a really high standard. A lot of them they maybe held hands. They maybe would share a kiss goodnight. To me, those were such extreme boundaries. But they had a freedom. They had something that I didn't have. So I figured, why don't I just give this a try? You know, I'm gonna take their extreme lines for chastity and give it a try. And I did, and I felt more free than I ever had in my whole life. So it took time. So I made a decision that I want to live this all the way. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't a bad kid. I had already made a commitment to save myself for marriage. I was a virgin. That was already what I was living, but I felt weighed by it. And then when I kind of decided to live chastity as a full lifestyle, to go all the way in, that was when I felt the freedom, and a freedom that led to a contagious joy. And at first, it was hard, and I had to make tough decisions, and had to end a relationship, and I had to make hard calls, and I felt a little bit alone in those decisions. But once I started to live this longer, it became easier. And there's a quote by St. Jose Maria Escriva. Might mess it up a little bit, but I think it goes along the lines, when you decide to firmly lead a clean life, a pure life, a chaste life, chastity will no longer be a burden to you, but a crown of triumph. And I pinned that quote up on my wall in college, right by my desk, and I had it kind of as a motivation. And I can truly say that it's true, that it's true. And once you realize that the teachings of the church, like all these rules, so when I was in high school, I just saw these rules, kind of boundaries, what you can do, what you can't do. And once I realized that they weren't rules to limit my freedom or to make me miserable, or because the Pope in Rome is a cranky old celibate man that doesn't like teens, once I realized that these rules were actually guidelines for my own well-being and for my happiness, and were what I was meant to live to begin with, because God made me and created me. Once that click happened, it was so much easier to accept not only this teaching of chastity, but all of the church's teachings. And I've learned that all of the church's teachings make sense, and logic and reason, they fit in with faith. They work together hand in hand. So making that connection with chastity for me was huge, because that was what opened the door for me to putting my whole life into this. Well, the best thing about chastity is that it's something for everyone. Everyone is meant to live chastity, and it's never too late to start. So despite your past, whatever that may be, it doesn't mean that you can't start to live a life of chastity, a life of purity, because it's something that we're all called to. It's something that we're all made for. And really, if any other mistake in our lives, I mean, anything, if we've done something stupid before and we've learned, oh, that wasn't a good decision, does that mean that we have to continue making that same stupid decision over and over again? So if we've given ourselves away and we haven't lived a life of chastity, okay, but we need to learn from that and learn from our mistakes and then make a decision to make a change. I mean, it's like touching the stove when it's hot, the classic example of touching a stove and learning the lesson, you know, don't touch it again, you're going to burn your hand. It only takes a fool to continue making the same mistakes over and over again. So even though living a life of chastity isn't something like a switch that you can flip on and on, it takes time, it takes practice, it's something you really have to practice and develop and grow in, but it's possible for everyone to decide that they're worth it, because chastity is about value, it is about respect, it is about dignity, and every single person out there has value, has dignity, and deserves to be respected. And all of the young women out there that have fallen into the lies that we need to give ourselves to receive love, there is a man out there, there are many men out there, good men out there, that are willing to come up to your standard, that are willing to fight for you. And it's totally worth it. There's no regret, and I know once in my life I decided to make chastity a lifestyle. The way that affected the way I dressed, what I did, the way I spoke, the way I danced. Once I opened up myself to this life of chastity, I never regretted it. I never looked back. I never thought, oh, I wish I would have, you know, hooked up with this guy, or I wish I would have done that. Or you don't regret those things. You regret what you have done and those mistakes, but you don't regret adding more to the list. So it's never too late to stop. It's never too late to make a decision for virtue. It's completely worth it. And if you just think about your future spouse out there, if your future spouse was in your same situation, and if your future spouse had been sexually active, would you want them to continue down that path? Or would you rather them to stop and to take a moment to think about you, and out of love for you, also make a decision?
A lot of things we all need to be reminded of, especially her comment that all of the church's teachings make sense. Amen to that. More on unpacking this whole idea of the chastity choice when we return on this edition of The Catholic View for Women. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Catholic View for Women. This segment we're discussing the chastity choice. We just heard a great interview with Christine Barber. She's the executive director, Christina I should say, executive director of Generation Life, and Janet Marana had the opportunity to interview her. And Father Frank Pavone, who guess has our spiritual director, has an interesting story tied to
Christina,
the work of this young woman.
Absolutely. Christina and her family, a very pro-life Catholic family, and one weekend when she was about 7 years old, Father Pavone was preaching at their parish, and after Mass, you know, out on the plaza, of course, her parents brought all the children up to meet Father, and for some reason, he just looked at Christina and gave all the children a blessing, but he looked at her and he said, one day you're going to work in the pro-life movement.
Wow.
And years later, you know, when she got involved in Generation Life, which, you know, I'll explain a little bit more what they do, she just got back in touch with Father Frank and said, you know what, Father? From the time you gave me that special, almost like a charge to say, you know, you're being called to work one day, it just stuck with her. She remembered it, and she ended up working for Generation Life. And, you know, the viewers should understand that Generation Life, yes, it's all about chastity education, but also they're also very involved in going out and witnessing in front of the abortion clinics and praying there. So it's a double-pronged mission they have. And they go out and do talks at parishes. So I really want to encourage her, if you liked Christina, there's an army of Christinas. You can go to their website, generationlife.org, and you can arrange for one of those speakers to come to speak at your youth group, or why not at every Mass? Because you never know who's in the pews.
But how important is it to have young, happy, joyful people talking about this message, the life message, but also the chastity message?
Exactly.
Absolutely. And what you notice about Christina is that, I mean, listening to her, she has joy. You can see it in her eyes and the way she tells her story, and she's very real. So they're going to relate to them because they're going to talk about their struggles. They're very humble in that way, you know. And the beautiful thing is that when I notice young people, for example, that I work with, 15, 16-year-olds that are living the chastity lifestyle, and they're being true to their faith, they're also very busy. they're doing pro-life work. They're involved in their church. So part of this being chaste is also not having a lot of idle time. Also filling your time with being with your family, doing things.
The friends you choose, too.
Yes, the friends you choose.
The company you keep.
Absolutely. So this is what makes it an integrated life, and that's why they're so happy, because they're giving, they're being generous, they're growing in virtue. And so chastity is a beautiful virtue. It's positive. It's truly loving. First of all, understanding your dignity, as she clearly does, and then extending that out to others and lifting them up as well.
A couple things she said too, which really touched me. You always quote you say it's your favorite quote of mine. I say there's no better place for a woman than the arms of Jesus inside the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And I love it when she said she just gave him just a little crack in her heart, but then he just kind of came in and whoosh.
Took over.
And when you really allow yourself to allow Jesus into your heart, it makes such a difference. And we often hear that from our Protestant brothers and sisters, but I don't know if we as Catholics really understand embracing that whole idea of opening your heart to Christ and what that does when you fall in love with him. Yes. It was Father John Harden, the Great Catechist, if I can remember the quote. Sister Joseph Andrew from Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist, gave it to me when we were speaking at a conference together. And he said, there is no power stronger in the world than a woman when she falls in love with Jesus Christ. Isn't that amazing?
That's
and that is so true. If you think about the great women in the church, especially the doctors of the church, St. Catherine of Siena, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Therese of Lisieux, and now we have 4 doctors of the church. St. Hildegard, I believe, is the 4th. But these women all fell head over heels in love with God.
Right.
And once you do that, as she said, it all starts to make sense.
Right. But notice before that happened, she said it was a road she had to go down.
There were challenges. She was very honest about that.
You know, first of all, she was raised in a beautiful family, very large family, Catholic family, very pro-life, always going to the sacraments. But she knew the rules, but that's what she saw them, as rules. And so she said initially chastity was more of like a burden. I'm just following these rules, And she said it's kind of like the Pope, like she referred to in Rome, giving us a bunch of rules. But it wasn't until, like you just said, Teresa, that she gave Jesus that little crack in her heart that the rules became not rules, but a lifestyle. And she embraced it. And she said, which I love this quote, no longer, she put that phrase in her college desk, in her college dorm room, no longer a burden, but a crown of triumph. So it was like Jesus in her life was a triumphant entry into her life, and now she fully embraced chastity. And you can see it by looking at her face how happy she is.
But also it's a process. So to remember that it's daily, it's a process of growing in virtue. And I visited the website on Generation Life, and the beautiful thing to see is these young people have a very strong prayer life. Many of them, they do holy hours, they go to Mass, daily Mass, they pray the Rosary. The Rosary, St. Pio said that the Rosary was the weapon against the evils of the world. Being chaste these days, it's very difficult.
Well, imagine growing up now. I mean, I know that you're younger than us. You're in your 30s. Janet is 60 now. I'm in my mid-50s. It was difficult for us in our various generations, but what's happening now in terms of the media saturation with the message all over the place.
We're in the hook-up culture, friends with benefits, all these phrases. I mean, it's the expectation, really, of young people now, and unfortunately, the young people are having sex before marriage younger and younger and younger. I mean, you're hearing kids now in junior high hooking up, which to me is like, I just can't imagine that. But it's the culture, it's the saturation, it's the messaging they see on TV, these reality show programs and all that. And, sometimes I say, parents have to monitor a little bit more what you're allowing the children, your children, to watch when they're young. Because I've noticed this over-sexualization of children is happening
younger and younger ages.
Right, absolutely. Like you have these, like they dress these little girls up, the fashion, like little princesses when they're 3 and 4 in these sexy outfits and these sexy hairdos.
Well, even the reality shows on these beauty contests. I forget the name of the one show, and I actually wrote a column about it. And they're turning them into women when they're still babies. Or trying to turn them into women. Women.
I mean, playing with dolls and doing those kind of things has been thrown out the window. I mean, I can remember, sounds old fashioned, but I know I was in 7th grade still playing with my Barbie doll. I mean, but nowadays they're over-sexualizing, advancing. I mean, I heard of a parent not long ago taking their 6th or 7th grade daughter, driving her and her boyfriend on a date to the movies and picking them up later. And I was like, what do you mean a date? They're only in 6th, 7th grade. Since when they have a date at that young age? But see, where's the parent to say, no, we don't do that. You're too young.
And parents need formation too, because how can we just only teach the young people and the parents still have a way of seeing things that might not be in line with what the church teaches about chastity? Because a young person can go to one of these talks and get very excited, on fire for this teaching, but if the parent still thinks that this is something modern or cool, there's a problem. At Hispanics for Life, for example, our community, this message does not get to us. I mean, it's really, really difficult. So what we did to try to reach both parents and the young people, and actually it was the parents who requested this, was to have presentations where the parents and the young people were there listening to the teaching together, sharing, and we saw so much healing and so much learning, because now they're on the same page, and everybody was comfortable, nobody was uncomfortable, and they were learning together, and when they left there more united as a family.
Well, speaking of the teachings, the Catechism of the Catholic Church has a lot of sections here on chastity, and I'd just like to, let's just maybe give our viewers a few of them. I'd like to start with 2337 from the Catholic Catechism, which reads, chastity means the successful integration of sexuality within the person, and thus the inner unity of man in his bodily and spiritual being. Sexuality, in which man's belonging to the bodily and biological world is expressed, becomes personal and truly human when it is integrated into the relationship of one person to another in the complete and lifelong mutual gift of a man and a woman. The virtue of chastity therefore involves the integrity of the person and the integrity of the gift. I mean, it's very clear when the Church's teaching is saying here. And then, of course, we can go on, Astrid. There's another one you can
Let me make one point on this, though, because what you just read, Janet, in the complete and lifelong mutual gift of a man and a woman, this reflects back on what we were talking about in some previous episodes where we looked at the Church's teaching on people who are struggling with same-sex attraction, that we're all called to be chaste, both men and women, regardless of our situation in our lives. So that's very, very important. And this is an ongoing thing, and it continues in the married life. Which I don't think a lot of people realize. The whole idea of being chaste encompasses your spiritual being and your physical being, to understand that. So, Astrid, you were going to go and read the next paragraph real quickly.
The chaste person maintains the integrity of the powers of life and love placed in him. This integrity ensures the unity of the person. It is opposed to any behavior that would impair it. It tolerates neither a double life nor duplicity in speech. This is purity, in action.
All right, and this one I think is really, really important and reflects on, this is paragraph 2342, reflects on what Christina was saying in the interview regarding this is an ongoing process. Our conversion is an ongoing process. We don't wake up one day and say, oh, this is great, we're going to do this, and it's over with. It's a constant getting up and recommitting our lives to the Lord and the Church teaching. So this is paragraph 2342, and it reads, self-mastery is a long and exacting work. One can never consider it acquired once and for all. It presupposes renewed effort at all stages of life. The effort required can be more intense in certain periods, and this is really important. We were talking about the influence on young people, and this is what the Church says. More intense in certain periods, such as when the personality is being formed during childhood and adolescence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to read on this, and for our homework, I'm recommending, of course, as always, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, available at the Religious Catalog, and in particular the sections 2337 through 2356, all on chastity. Read it, reread it, and really study it. And then also go to generationlife.org, their website, where you can find more information. You can actually listen to a beautiful video they have there of their ministry. A lot of young faces talking about the joy of chastity and the work they're doing. I highly encourage you to invite one of those speakers into your parish. And also, too, if you notice all those the teens that are involved in this, they have what Mother Angelica always says, holy reminders. A lot of them have miraculous medals or crosses that they wear. And of course, I want to remind our viewers about our holy reminder for their kitchen, our Madonna of the Kitchen, also available at the Religious Catalog. If you keep a lot of holy reminders around the house, it keeps your mind focused on where you should be, on Jesus.
I even tell people when I give my media seminars, especially parents, you're talking about involving the parents, that It's funny. You remember how you know your mother used to sometimes have those pictures in the home of the Jesus with the eyes following you.
Oh yeah.
On the living room, and people laugh. But you know what? Put one of those in by your television.
Right.
Put a religious object or something near your television set and near your computer, because it will remind you, just like our lady Madonna of the Kitchen does, that we should be doing things in a holy way according
finally,
to the church.
maybe a picture of Jesus on your mirror, and do a mirror check in the morning. How you're dressing also should be in a chaste fashion. And when you check in your mirror, say, how would Jesus approve of this outfit?
Right.
That's a good
or
thing
an
for
image of Our
parents,
Lady.
you know?
What would Mary do?
What would Mary do?
What would Mary do?
Exactly.
We've always heard about what would Jesus do, what would Mary do,
would Mary
and what would
do?
the saints do. All right.
Exactly.
Good discussion, ladies. Thanks. And as Janet said, you can find all the information, the clips, of course, from the Catechism, and also the interviews that Generation Life has to offer on their website. Everything is on our website. Our resources for your information and continued education, because this is an ongoing process, and that's why we give you all of these great resources. You can find it at our website, which is thecatholicviewforwomen.com. For Janet Marana and Astrid Bene-Gutierrez, I'm Teresa Tomeo. It's great to be with you, and we hope you'll stay tuned for the next edition of The Catholic View for Women right here on the EWTN network. We'll see you next time.